Don't take the pill in the yellow slot, Arthur. Those aren't your heart medication. The voice on the other end of the phone line was shaking, and it wasn't because of a bad signal. It was Stan, the head pharmacist at the drugstore on Main Street, a man I have known since we were both young men trying to figure out how the world worked. I stood there in the middle of my basement woodshop, surrounded by the smell of cedar, sawdust, and old varnish, holding my flip phone so tight I thought the plastic might crack. My hand hovered over the little plastic organizer box sitting on my workbench. Tuesday morning, the yellow slot. Inside lay a small white pill that looked exactly like the lisinopril I had been taking for 15 years, but Stan was telling me it was poison. I looked at the pill, then I looked at the stairs leading up to the kitchen where my daughter-in-law, Brenda, was humming a cheerful tune while making coffee. She had filled this box last night. She had told me she wanted to take the burden off my shoulders. I felt a cold chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the drafty basement. I wasn't just an old man to her anymore. I was an obstacle. If this story of a grandfather outsmarting poison for his legacy hit you hard, smash subscribe for more real revenge justice. Comment, Grandpa won if you're Team Arthur. I didn't say a word to Stan for a solid 10 seconds. I just breathed in the scent of the wood. I have spent my life building things. I was a structural engineer for 40 years. I know that if the foundation is rotten, the house comes down. My family was the house, and I was suddenly realizing the rot had spread deeper than I ever imagined. Are you sure, Stan? I asked, my voice low and gravelly. I didn't want the sound to carry up the ventilation ducts. I am 88 years old. My hearing isn't what it used to be, but my mind is as sharp as the chisels hanging on the wall in front of me. I am looking at the security footage right now, Arthur, Stan said. His voice was serious, dead serious. She came in yesterday to pick up your refill. She asked for a consultation. She asked me specifically about drug interactions. She wanted to know what would happen if a man of your age and weight suddenly stopped his blood pressure meds and replaced them with high-dosage caffeine pills. I thought she was just being anxious. I thought she was worried. But then I saw her in the aisle. She bought a bottle of generic energy boosters. They look exactly like your heart pills, Arthur. Exactly. I had a bad feeling, a gut feeling, so I checked the batch numbers on the bottle she brought back to return this morning, claiming it was the wrong kind. She swapped them, Arthur. She kept the real heart medicine and gave you the boosters. If you take those with your condition, your heart won't handle the spike. You'll have a massive stroke. I looked at the white pill again. It was a bullet. A silent, invisible bullet aimed right at my chest. I thanked Stan. I told him to save the footage. I told him to put the return bottle in a safe. Then I hung up the phone and slipped it into the pocket of my flannel shirt. I stood there for a long time. My heart was already pounding, and I hadn't even taken the pill. I thought about my son, Robert. He was a good boy, but soft. He never liked conflict. He married Brenda 10 years ago. I never trusted her. She had a way of looking at things, my furniture, my house, my car, like she was appraising them for an auction. But Robert loved her and I loved Robert, so I kept my mouth shut. I paid for their wedding. I helped them with the down payment on their house. When my wife Martha passed away 3 years ago, they insisted I move into the in-law suite attached to their home. They said it was for my safety. They said they didn't want me to be lonely. Now I knew the truth. It wasn't about loneliness. It was about control. I picked up the pill organizer. I took the white pill out of the Tuesday slot and wrapped it in a piece of masking tape. I put that in my pocket. Then I reached into a drawer where I kept a stash of mints. I found one that was roughly the same size and shape. I sanded it down a little with a piece of fine grit sandpaper until it looked dull and powdery, just like the medicine. I blew off the dust and dropped the mint into the yellow slot. I walked up the stairs slowly. I made sure to let my boots thud heavy on the steps. I wanted her to hear me coming. I needed to play the part. The frail, oblivious old man, the grandfather who was losing his grip. That is what she thought I was. That is what she was counting on. When I opened the door to the kitchen, the smell of bacon and coffee hit me. Brenda was standing by the stove. She turned and gave me that smile, that wide, overly bright smile that never reached her eyes. "Good morning, Dad," she chirped. She always called me Dad. It grated on my nerves. I have a name. "It's Arthur. Sleep well." I slept fine, I grunted, moving to the table. I sat down heavily. I let my hand shake a little as I reached for the coffee mug. "You have to sell the lie. Did you take your pills yet?" she asked. She turned back to the bacon, but I saw her shoulders tense up. She was listening. She was waiting. "Not yet," I said. I pulled the organizer out of my pocket. I set it on the table. I stared at the back of her head. I wondered how someone could be so evil. I wondered if my son knew. The thought made my stomach turn. If Robert was in on this, I didn't know if I could handle it. A father can survive a lot of things, but betrayal by his own blood is a wound that never heals. I watched her turn around. She wiped her hands on her apron. She walked over and stood next to me. "Here, let me get water for you," she said. She poured a glass of tap water and set it down. She watched the box. Her eyes were locked on it like a hawk watching a field mouse. I opened the Tuesday lid. I picked up the sanded down mint. She held her breath. I could hear it. The silence in the kitchen was heavy. I popped the fake pill into my mouth. I took a big gulp of water. I swallowed. There, all done, I said. She let out a breath. Her shoulders dropped. Good, she said. It is important to stay on schedule. Dr. Evans said your blood pressure has been a little unstable lately. We don't want any accidents. No, I said, looking her dead in the eye. We certainly don't want any accidents. I ate my breakfast in silence. I chewed the bacon without tasting it. My mind was racing. I needed a plan. I couldn't just call the police. Not yet. If I called the cops now, it would be her word against mine. She would say it was a mistake. She would say she got confused. She would say I was senile and mixed them up myself. I needed proof. I needed undeniable, concrete proof that she was trying to kill me, and I needed to know if Robert was involved. After breakfast, I told her I was going to the library. I still drove my old truck. They had tried to take the keys away last month, saying my reflexes were too slow. I refused. I told them the day I couldn't park between the lines was the day I would hand over the keys. I didn't go to the library. I went to the bank. I walked into the lobby and asked to see the branch manager. Mr. Henderson knows me well. I have kept my accounts at that bank for 50 years. When I sat down in his office, I didn't waste time with small talk. I need to see the activity on my joint account with Robert, I said. Mr. Henderson typed on his computer. He frowned. He clicked the mouse a few times. Arthur, there have been some significant withdrawals in the last 3 weeks, he said. Show me, I said. He turned the screen. I put on my reading glasses. My heart sank. $5,000 here, $3,000 there, checks written to cash. And the signatures, they were mine, but they weren't mine. They were shaky. They looked like someone trying to copy a signature they had seen 1,000 times. Who cashed these? I asked. Brenda, mostly, Mr. Henderson said. She comes in the drive-thru. She says you are in the car but not feeling well enough to come inside. She has your ID, Arthur. I sat back in the leather chair. It was worse than I thought. They were draining me dry. If I died from a stroke next week, the rest of the money would transfer to Robert automatically. Brenda would have control of everything. The house, the savings, the life insurance. I thanked Mr. Henderson. I told him to freeze the account immediately. I told him not to call my son. I told him I suspected fraud. Then I went to see my lawyer. My lawyer, James, is a shark in a suit. He has handled my business contracts for decades. I laid the pill wrapped in tape on his desk. I told him everything. I told him about the phone call from Stan. I told him about the bank account. James listened without blinking. When I finished, he leaned forward. We can nail her, Arthur, he said, but we have to be smart. If we move too fast, she destroys the evidence. We need to catch her in the act. We need to catch her admitting it. How? I asked. James smiled. A cold, hard smile. We are going to rewrite your will today, and we are going to make sure she finds out about it. We spent the next 2 hours drafting a new document. In this new will, I left everything, every single dime, to a charitable trust for the preservation of historic architecture. I left Robert a token amount, $5, and I added a clause. A specific clause stating that if my death was found to be suspicious in any way, a private investigation firm was already paid for and authorized to look into it. But that wasn't the trap. The trap was the copy. James made a draft copy of the will. He put it in a distinctive blue legal folder. Leave this on your desk, James said. Somewhere she will see it. Make it look like you were trying to hide it but did a bad job. If she is snooping, she will read it. And if she reads it, she will panic. I took the folder. I felt like a soldier going into battle. I was 88 years old, but I felt a fire in my belly I hadn't felt since I was 20. I drove home. The truck rattled over the pavement. I pulled into the driveway. Brenda's car was gone. Good. I went into the house. I walked into the small study off the living room that I used as my office. I placed the blue folder under a stack of magazines on the corner of my desk, leaving just the corner of the blue paper sticking out. It was bait. Then I went downstairs to the workshop. I had work to do. I needed to know if Robert was part of this. I needed to look him in the eye. That evening, Robert came home from work. He looked tired. He worked in sales, a job he hated. He came down to the workshop to say hello. Hey, Dad, he said. He leaned against the doorframe, sawdust in the air again. You're always working, keeps me alive, I said. I kept sanding a piece of oak. I didn't look up. Robert, I said, how are things financially? He stiffened. I saw it out of the corner of my eye. Why do you ask? Just wondering, I said. I was thinking about taking a trip. Maybe Europe, cost a bit of money. He shifted his weight. That's great, Dad, you should go. You have plenty of money, do I asked. I stopped sanding. I turned and looked at him. He looked nervous, but he didn't look guilty. He looked like a man who was worried about something else. Brenda handles the bills now, right? I asked. Yeah, mostly, he said. She's good at that stuff, better than me. Does she show you the statements? No, not really. Why, Dad, is something wrong? I looked at my son. He was weak. He was oblivious, but he wasn't a killer. I could see it in his face. He truly didn't know. If he knew we were being robbed, he would have panicked. He was just a man who had handed over the reins of his life to a woman because it was easier than fighting her. Nothing is wrong, I lied, just thinking about the future. Robert went upstairs for dinner. I stayed in the basement. I waited. I heard footsteps later that night, soft footsteps. It was around 2:00 a.m. I wasn't asleep. I was sitting in my armchair in the dark listening. The floorboards in the hallway above creaked. They creaked right outside my study door. I waited 10 minutes, then I heard the creak again. She had taken the bait. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house was different. The air was thick. Brenda wasn't humming, she was pale. Her eyes were darting around the room. She looked at me with a mixture of fear and hatred that made my skin crawl. She had seen the draft will. She thought I was cutting them out. She thought she was running out of time. If I was right, she would try to accelerate the timeline. The pills were a slow kill. A stroke could happen today or next week. But now that she knew the money was going to charity, she couldn't wait. I sat at the breakfast table. She put the pill organizer down. "Here you go, Dad," she said. Her voice was tight. I looked at the Wednesday slot. Another white pill, another fake. I did the swap again, same trick. I took a drink of water. Brenda watched me swallow. She gripped the counter so hard her knuckles were white. "You know, Brenda," I said casually, "I have been thinking about what?" She snapped. "About the house," I said. "It's too big, and I feel like I am a burden. I was thinking about moving into a facility next week." Her head snapped up. "Next week?" "Yes," I said. "I have an appointment with a director at the Oakwood home on Friday. I think it is time I managed my own affairs again." I saw the panic explode in her eyes. Friday. Today was Wednesday. If I moved out on Friday, she lost access. She lost the pills. She lost the chance to stage an accident. That's sudden," she stammered. "When you get to be my age, you realize there is no time like the present," I said. I finished my coffee and stood up. "I am going to the shop," I said. "I spent the day in the basement, but I wasn't working wood. I was setting up my own security. I had an old hunting camera, a trail cam I used to use at my cabin. It was battery-operated and motion-activated. I hid it on a high shelf in the kitchen, tucked behind a decorative vase pointing right at the table and the medicine cabinet. I also called Stan. "I need you to prepare a real bottle for me," I said. "A sealed bottle of my actual medication. I'm coming to get it." I snuck out the back basement door. I walked a mile to the main road and caught a taxi. I couldn't risk taking the truck. She might hear the engine. I got the real pills. I kept them hidden in a hollowed-out book in my room. Thursday came. The tension in the house was unbearable. Brenda was frantic. She was making phone calls in hushed tones. I assumed she was calling creditors or maybe just panicking. Dinner that night was the climax. Robert was there, eating quietly. Brenda was pacing. "Dad," she said, "I made you a special dessert." "Oh," I said. "Chocolate mousse," she said. "Your favorite." She brought a small bowl over. It looked rich and dark. I looked at the bowl. I looked at her. "I'm not really hungry," I said. "You have to try it," she said. Her voice was shrill. "I made it just for you." Robert looked up. "Just try it, Dad." She worked hard on it. I picked up the spoon. I stirred the mousse. I saw tiny white specks swirling in the dark chocolate. They weren't sugar. They didn't dissolve quite right. I put the spoon down. "Robert," I said. My voice was firm. Voice of a father, the voice of a man who built skyscrapers. "Robert, trade bowls with me." "What?" Robert asked. "I want your vanilla ice cream. You take the mousse." Brenda lunged. "No." She knocked the bowl off the table. It shattered. Chocolate splattered everywhere. Robert stood up. "Brenda, what the hell?" She was breathing hard. Her chest was heaving. It had nuts in it," she lied. "I forgot Robert is allergic." "Robert isn't allergic to nuts," I said quietly. "He is allergic to shellfish. You know that." The room went silent. Robert looked at his wife. He looked at the mess on the floor. He looked at me. "What is going on?" Robert whispered. I stood up. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the pill bottle Stan had given me, the one filled with the fake pills I had saved from the organizer. I poured them onto the table. They rattled like bones. "Ask her, Robert," I said. "Ask her why the pills in my organizer are caffeine boosters. Ask her why she forged my signature at the bank. Ask her why she tried to feed me a bowl of poison just now because she found a fake will on my desk and thought the money was gone." Brenda's face went white, then red. "You crazy old bat," she screamed. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "You're senile. You're making this up." "Am I?" asked. I pulled out my phone. I dialed a number. "Come in, gentlemen," I said. The front door opened. 2 police officers walked in. Behind them was James, my lawyer. "I didn't just sit in the basement, Brenda," I said. "I called the police this afternoon." I showed them the footage from the pharmacy. I showed them the bank statements, and I invited them to listen from the hallway while we ate dinner. Brenda looked at the cops. She looked at the door. She tried to run. It was pathetic, really. She scrambled toward the back door, but the officers were younger and faster. They had her in cuffs before she reached the kitchen island. Robert stood there, frozen. He looked like a statue. He watched his wife read her rights. He watched them bag the chocolate mousse from the floor as evidence. She was screaming as they dragged her out, screaming that I was a devil, screaming that I had ruined everything. When the door closed, the silence was deafening. Robert sank into his chair. He put his head in his hands. He began to sob, not quiet crying, heavy body-shaking sobs. I didn't hug him. "Not yet." I sat down across from him. "She did it for the money, Dad," he choked out. "I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know." "I know you didn't, son," I said. "If you knew, you would be in cuffs too, but I let it happen," he said. "I let her take over. I was so lazy. I was so weak." "Yes, you were," I said. "I didn't sugarcoat it. A man must hear the truth to rebuild. You were weak. And it almost got me killed." I stood up. My knees popped. I felt every one of my 88 years. "Pack your things, Robert," I said. He looked up, terrified. "You're kicking me out." "No," I said. "We are selling this house." It has bad memories now, the foundation is rotten. We need to build a new one. I walked over to the window. I saw the police car lights flashing against the trees. If this story of a grandfather outsmarting poison for his legacy hit you hard, smash subscribe for more real revenge justice. Comment Grandpa 1 if you're Team Arthur. I am 88 years old. My blood pressure is high. My joints hurt, but my mind is clear. I survived a war. I survived the death of my wife, and I survived my daughter-in-law. I turned back to my son. Tomorrow you're coming to the workshop, I said. I am going to teach you how to use the lathe. I am going to teach you how to build something that lasts. Robert wiped his eyes. He nodded. Yes, Dad. I took a deep breath. I walked to the sink and poured myself a glass of water. I took my real medication from the bottle in my pocket. I swallowed it. I wasn't just staying alive. I was reclaiming my life. And for the first time in a long time, I was the one in charge. I grabbed my keys off the counter. The metal felt cold against my palm, grounding me. Being in charge meant I couldn't just sit around my apartment waiting for the next weird thing to happen. I had to go on the offensive. I had to figure out where this started. I decided to go to the only place in town that kept records of everything, even the stuff people wanted to forget. The public library downtown wasn't exactly a high-tech hub. It was an old brick building that looked like it was frowning at the street. I parked my car under a flickering street lamp and walked up the concrete steps. The air outside was thick and humid, sticking to my skin like a wet shirt. When I pushed the heavy wooden doors open, the smell hit me instantly. It was that specific library smell, a mix of old paper, dust, and floor wax. It was comforting in a way, but also kind of suffocating. The place was mostly empty. A few students were huddled over textbooks at the back tables, and an old guy was asleep in an armchair with a newspaper over his face. I walked up to the front desk. Mrs. Halloway was there. She had been the librarian since I was a kid. She looked exactly the same, with her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and glasses on a chain around her neck. She didn't look up when I approached. She was stamping books with a rhythmic thud-thud sound that echoed in the quiet room. Mrs. Halloway, I said. I tried to keep my voice steady. She stopped stamping and looked over her spectacles at me. Her eyes were sharp like a bird's. Can I help you? I need to see the local newspaper archives, I said. From 20 years ago, she paused. The silence stretched out for a few seconds. I could hear the hum of the vending machine in the hallway. Why would you want to dig up the past? She asked. Her voice wasn't friendly. It was low and suspicious. I just need to check something, I lied, for a project. She stared at me for another long moment like she was trying to read my mind. Finally, she reached under the desk and pulled out a heavy ring of keys. The metal jingled loudly. You know the rules, no pens, no food, and don't mess up the filing system. It took me 6 months to organize the 90s. I nodded, thanks. She pointed to a door in the back corner. Basement, light switch is on the right. I took the keys and walked away. I could feel her watching me until I turned the corner. The basement door creaked when I opened it, a long, high-pitched whine that made my teeth hurt. I fumbled for the light switch and flicked it. A row of fluorescent tubes overhead buzzed to life, flickering a sickly yellow before settling into a steady hum. The archive room was colder than the rest of the building. It smelled strongly of mildew and damp cardboard. Rows of gray metal filing cabinets lined the walls. In the center of the room, there was a machine for reading microfilm. It looked like an ancient computer from a sci-fi movie. I sat down at the machine and started pulling out reels of film. I didn't even know exactly what I was looking for, but I had a gut feeling. I started with the year I turned 12. That was the year everything felt different. That was the year the first bad thing happened, even if I hadn't realized it at the time. I threaded the film into the machine and started scrolling. The images whizzed by in a blur of black and white. Obituaries, sports scores, ads for grocery stores that didn't exist anymore. The rhythmic clicking of the reel was hypnotic. Click. Click, click, then I stopped. There was a headline on the front page of the local Gazette from October. Local boy found in WOODS, CLAIMS shadow man took HIM. I leaned closer to the screen. The graininess of the old photo made it hard to see the boy's face clearly, but I recognized the location. It was the edge of the forest behind the old elementary school. I remembered that day. I wasn't the boy in the article, but I had been there. A flashback hit me hard like a physical shove to the chest. I was 12 years old again. It was recess. The air was crisp and smelled like dried leaves and asphalt. Me and my friend Mark were standing near the fence that separated the playground from the woods. We weren't supposed to be that close to the tree line, but we were looking for a baseball Mark had hit over the fence. I see it, Mark had said, pointing into the brush. The woods were dense and dark even in the middle of the day. The trees grew too close together, blocking out the sun. I remembered feeling cold, even though I was wearing my thick winter coat. Don't go in there, I had told him. Mark just laughed. He climbed through a gap in the chain-link fence. I watched him disappear into the shadows. I stood there gripping the cold metal of the fence, my heart pounding in my ears. I waited and waited. It was quiet, too quiet. Usually you could hear squirrels or birds, but the woods were dead silent. Then I heard a sound. It wasn't a scream, it was a whisper. It sounded like dry leaves sliding over pavement. "Mark," I called out. He came running back a minute later, his face pale. He didn't have the ball. He scrambled back through the fence and grabbed my arm. His grip was so tight it hurt. "We have to go," he whispered. "What did you see?" I asked. He wouldn't tell me. He just shook his head, his eyes wide and terrified. He never went near those woods again. A week later, another kid from our class went missing for 2 days. That was the kid in the newspaper article. I snapped back to the present. The basement archive room felt suddenly very small. I looked at the date on the article, October 14th. That was exactly 20 years ago today. A chill ran down my spine. The coincidence was too precise. I kept scrolling through the microfilm looking for follow-up stories. There was nothing. No explanation of what happened to the kid, no description of the shadow man. It was like the town just decided to forget it happened. I printed a copy of the article. The machine whirred and groaned, spitting out a warm, damp piece of paper. The ink smelled sharp. I folded it and shoved it into my pocket. I needed to find Mark. I hadn't talked to him since high school. We drifted apart after that day at the fence. He got weird quiet. Eventually he moved away, but if anyone knew what started this, it was him. I stood up to leave, and that's when I heard it thump. It came from the other side of the rows of filing cabinets. It was a heavy sound, like a book falling off a shelf, but there were no shelves over there, only cabinets. "Hello," I called out. Silence. Just the buzzing of the lights and the hum of the dehumidifier in the corner. I walked slowly toward the noise. My shoes squeaked on the linoleum floor. I peered around the edge of the last cabinet. There was nothing there, just the blank concrete wall. But then I looked down. On the floor in the dust, there was a footprint. It wasn't a shoe print, it looked like a bare foot but bigger. The toes were elongated, dragging slightly, and it was wet. A dark, oily residue was seeping into the floor tile where the foot had stepped. I backed away. My heart was hammering against my ribs again. I wasn't alone in the basement. I turned and walked fast toward the door. I didn't run because running felt like admitting I was prey. I kept my head up. I reached the door, grabbed the handle, and pulled. It didn't budge. I pulled harder. It was locked. "Hey," I shouted, banging on the metal. "Mrs. Halloway, the door is stuck." No answer. The lights overhead flickered again, buzz, click, buzz, then they went out completely. I was in total darkness. The smell of mildew seemed to get stronger, mixing with something else, something rotten like stagnant water. I fumbled for my phone in my pocket. My hands were shaking. I pressed the button to turn on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating the swirling dust motes in the air. I swung the light around the room. The filing cabinets cast long, stretched-out shadows that looked like fingers reaching for me. Then I saw it, sitting on top of the microfilm machine I had just used. It was a book. Not a library book. It was a small, black notebook. It hadn't been there a minute ago. I didn't want to touch it. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to stay by the door and keep banging until someone heard me, but I couldn't just stand there. I was in charge, remember. That was the deal. I walked back toward the table, keeping the light steady. I reached out and picked up the notebook. The cover was leather, worn smooth and cracked with age. There was no title. I opened it. The pages were yellow and brittle. The handwriting inside was frantic, scrawled in black ink that looked like it had been pressed down hard enough to tear the paper. I shined my light on the first page. It was a list of names. My name was at the bottom. Above my name was Mark's. And above his was the name of the kid from the newspaper article. There were dates next to each name. Next to mine, there was no date of disappearance. There was just a question mark. I flipped the page. It wasn't writing anymore. It was drawings, rough, jagged sketches of the woods. The trees were drawn with faces twisting in agony. And in the middle of the trees, there was a figure, tall, thin, no face. I slammed the book shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the small room. Suddenly, the lock on the door clicked. I spun around with my flashlight. The door creaked open just a crack, letting in a sliver of light from the hallway. I didn't wait to see who opened it. I shoved the notebook into my jacket pocket next to the newspaper clipping and bolted. I shoulder-checked the door, stumbling out into the hallway. The library was empty. The students were gone. The old man was gone. Even Mrs. Halloway was gone. The front desk was deserted. I ran to the exit, pushing through the heavy wooden doors and bursting out into the night air. The rain had started again, a cold drizzle that felt good on my hot face. I got to my car and locked the doors as soon as I was inside. I sat there for a minute, breathing hard, gripping the steering wheel. I looked at the library. The windows were dark. It looked like nobody had been there for years. I started the engine and drove. I didn't go home. I didn't feel safe there anymore. I drove toward the edge of town, toward the only person who might have answers. I was going to find Mark. Even if I had to drive all night, the road was slick with rain. The windshield wipers slapped back and forth, a steady rhythm that tried to calm me down. I kept checking the rearview mirror. Every time headlights appeared behind me, I tensed up, expecting them to follow me. But they always turned off or passed me. I needed to think. The notebook, who left it there? How did they know I was coming? Was it Mrs. Halloway or something else? I reached into my pocket and touched the leather cover of the notebook. It felt warm, warmer than my body heat should have made it. It felt like it was pulsing very faintly. I pulled my hand away and wiped it on my jeans. This was getting way deeper than just a haunted apartment or a bad dream. This was a list. A pattern. I drove for 2 hours until I reached the next town over. I pulled into a 24-hour diner. I needed coffee and I needed light, lots of light. The diner was bright and smelled like bacon and old coffee. I took a booth in the corner where I could see the whole room. A waitress with tired eyes came over and poured me a cup without asking. Menu, she asked. Just coffee, I said. She walked away. I pulled the notebook out and set it on the table. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of the diner, it looked even older. I opened it again, skipping past the list of names. I started reading the frantic writing in the middle of the book. It feeds on memory, one page said. If you remember, it can find you. If you forget, it waits. I took a sip of the hot coffee. It burned my tongue, but I didn't care. It waits in the spaces between, the writing continued. Between the walls, between the trees, between thoughts. I thought about the footprint in the library basement, the oily residue. Fire doesn't hurt it, water doesn't stop it, you have to starve it. What? Starve it? How do you starve a shadow? I kept reading. The handwriting changed halfway through, like a different person had started writing. This new writing was neater, more precise. The anchor must be broken, the first location, the source. The source, that had to be the woods, the place where Mark saw something, the place where the other kid went missing. I pulled out my phone and searched for Mark's name. It took a while. He wasn't on social media. I found an old address listed in a White Pages directory from 3 years ago. It was a farmhouse about 20 miles north of here. I threw a $5 bill on the table and grabbed the notebook. I had a direction now. I got back in the car. The rain had turned into a storm. Thunder rumbled in the distance, shaking the ground. I drove north, leaving the town lights behind. The roads got narrower, turning from pavement to gravel. The GPS on my phone led me down a long, winding driveway lined with overgrown hedges. Out of the drive, there was a small house. It looked abandoned. The paint was peeling and the porch sagged on one side. I parked and cut the engine. The only light came from my headlights cutting through the rain. I got out and ran to the porch. I knocked on the door. Mark. I yelled over the sound of the wind. It's me. Open up, no answer. I tried the knob. It was unlocked. That was a bad sign. People who are scared usually lock their doors. I pushed the door open. Mark, the inside of the house was a mess. Papers were scattered everywhere. Furniture was overturned. It looked like a fight had happened here. I stepped inside, water dripping from my jacket onto the floor. The air smelled stale, like trapped heat, and something metallic, like copper. I used my phone light again. I walked through the living room to the kitchen. On the kitchen table, there was a map. It was pinned down with a steak knife. I walked over to it. It was a map of our hometown. A red circle was drawn around the elementary school and the woods behind it. And scrawled across the map in red marker were the words, "Don't go back." I heard a floorboard creak upstairs. I froze. Mark, I called out, softer this time. Another creak. Someone was up there. I walked to the stairs. They were steep and narrow. I put one foot on the bottom step, then another. I tried to be quiet, but the old wood groaned under my weight. When I got to the top of the landing, there was a hallway with 3 doors. 2 were open, 1 was closed. The closed door had light coming from underneath it. A faint flickering light like a candle. I walked to the door. I could hear breathing on the other side, slow, ragged breathing. I reached for the handle. My hand was shaking so bad I almost couldn't grip it. I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room was empty of furniture. In the center of the floor, sitting cross-legged, was a man. He had a beard and long, messy hair. He was staring at a candle burning on the floor in front of him. He didn't look up when I entered. "Mark," I asked. He stopped breathing for a second, then he slowly turned his head. It was him. But he looked 20 years older than he should have. His eyes were sunken, dark circles bruising the skin underneath. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in a month. "You shouldn't have come," he rasped. His voice was like gravel. "I found the list," I said. I stepped into the room. I held up the notebook. Mark's eyes widened when he saw the book. He scrambled backward, crab walking away from me until his back hit the wall. "Where did you get that?" he screamed. "Get it away from me." "It was in the library," I said. "Mark, what is happening? Why is my name on the list?" He was shaking his head back and forth, pulling at his hair. "You brought it with you. You brought it here." "I didn't bring anything," I said. "I just want answers." He pointed a shaking finger at my shadow on the wall. The candlelight made it dance and stretch. "Look," he whispered. I looked at my shadow. It mimicked my movements. I raised my arm. The shadow raised its arm. "Look closer," Mark hissed. I squinted. My shadow was on the wall, distinct and black against the peeling wallpaper. But then I noticed something. My shadow was holding something. I looked at my empty hands. I was holding the notebook in my left hand and my phone in my right. But my shadow wasn't holding a book or a phone. My shadow was holding a knife. I dropped the notebook. I patted my pockets. I didn't have a knife. I looked back at the wall. The shadow knife was still there, and then the shadow moved, not me, the shadow. It turned its head to look at me even though I was facing forward. The silhouette of a face in profile detached itself from my outline and grinned. I couldn't see a mouth, but I could feel the grin. It was a jagged, tearing sensation in my mind. "Run," Mark yelled. The candle blew out. We were in the dark. I heard Mark scream. It was a short, wet sound, then a thud. "Mark," I shouted. I swept my phone light across the room. Mark was gone. The window was open, rain blowing in. He must have jumped. We were on the second floor. I ran to the window and looked down. I expected to see his body on the grass below, but there was nothing, just the wet grass and the storm. I turned back to the room. The notebook was lying on the floor where I dropped it. I grabbed it. I didn't know why, but I felt like I needed it. It was the only clue I had. I ran downstairs, slipping on the last few steps and banging my shoulder against the wall. I ignored the pain. I burst out the front door and ran to my car. I fumbled with the keys, dropping them in the mud. Come on," I muttered, groping around in the dark slush. My fingers brushed the metal. I grabbed them and unlocked the car. I threw myself inside and locked the doors. I started the engine and threw it into reverse, tires spinning in the gravel before finding traction. I sped down the driveway, not looking back. My heart was beating so fast I thought I was going to pass out. I needed to calm down. I needed a plan. Mark was gone. The library was a trap. The notebook was something evil. I looked at the passenger seat where I had tossed the book. It was sitting there, innocuous and quiet. I had to go back to the source. The note said the anchor must be broken. The source was the woods behind the school. It was crazy. It was suicide, but I had nowhere else to go. If I went home, it would follow me. If I went to the police, they would lock me up. I drove back toward my hometown. The rain pounded on the roof. As I drove, I started to remember more. Pieces of my childhood were coming back, things I had blocked out. I remembered a dream I used to have when I was 12. I was standing in a room with no doors. The walls were made of black water and something was rising out of the floor. I shook my head to clear the image, focus on the road. I reached the town limits around 3:00 a.m. The streets were dead. I drove past my apartment building. I saw a light on in my window. I slammed on the brakes. I lived alone. I had left the lights off. Someone or something was in my apartment. I stared up at the window. A silhouette moved past the curtains. It looked like me. It moved like me. A cold realization washed over me. It wasn't just haunting me. It was replacing me. I hit the gas and drove away. I couldn't go there. I drove to the old elementary school. It had been shut down 5 years ago and was due for demolition. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, but I knew where the gap was. Mark and I had used it 100 times. I parked the car a block away under a heavy oak tree. I turned off the engine and the lights. I sat in the dark for a moment, gathering my courage. I grabbed the flashlight and the notebook. I zipped up my jacket. I got out of the car. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the wind was picking up. It whistled through the power lines above me. I walked to the fence. The gap was still there, hidden behind a bush. I squeezed through the metal, scratching my jacket. The playground was eerie in the dark. The swings were moving slightly in the wind, squeaking rhythmically, squeak, squeak. I walked past the rusted jungle gym and toward the tree line. The woods loomed ahead, a wall of black. I stopped at the edge. This was where Mark had seen it. This was where it started. I took a deep breath. It smelled like wet earth and pine needles and rot. I stepped into the woods. The ground was soft and muddy. My feet sank in with every step. I kept my flashlight beam pointed at the ground, watching for roots. I walked for what felt like 10 minutes. The trees got thicker. The sounds of the town faded away until all I could hear was the wind in the branches and my own breathing. I was looking for something specific. The notebook had drawings of a clearing with a stone in the middle. I pushed through a thicket of thorns that tore at my jeans. I stumbled into a small open space. There it was. In the center of the clearing, there was a large, flat rock. It looked like a table, and sitting on top of the rock was a metal box. I walked over to it. The box was rusted shut. It looked like an old tackle box or a lunch box. I set the flashlight on the rock and used both hands to pry the lid open. The hinges groaned and snapped. Inside there were objects, toys, a yo-yo, a baseball, a plastic soldier, a friendship bracelet. These were trophies. I reached in and picked up the baseball. It was dirty and scuffed. This was Mark's ball, the one he lost 20 years ago. I felt a sudden drop in temperature. My breath started to fog in the air. I wasn't alone. I slowly put the ball back in the box. I grabbed my flashlight and turned around. Standing at the edge of the clearing, just outside the ring of light, was a figure. It wasn't the shadow man. It was a woman. She was wearing a long coat. "Mrs. Halloway," I whispered. She stepped into the light. It was the librarian, but her eyes were completely black. No whites, no irises, just pools of ink. She smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "You found the collection," she said. Her voice didn't sound like an old lady anymore. It sounded like a chorus of voices speaking at once. "Why?" I asked. "Why are you doing this?" "I'm the keeper," she said. "I keep the records, and I keep the payments." "Payments for what?" "For the peace," she said. "The town stays quiet. The town stays safe. As long as we pay the toll." She took a step closer. In her hand she held a stamp. The heavy metal kind she used at the library desk, but the bottom of it was sharp. "You're the next payment," she said. I backed up until my legs hit the stone rock. I was trapped. I looked at the box of toys, the anchor. The notebook said the anchor must be broken. I grabbed the metal box. It was heavy. Mrs. Halloway lunged at me. She moved unnaturally fast like a glitch in a video game. I swung the box with everything I had. It connected with her head with a sick crunch. She stumbled back, falling into the mud. She didn't scream. She just hissed like a cat. I didn't wait. I turned to the rock. I raised the box high above my head and smashed it down onto the stone. Clang. The rusted metal dented but didn't break. Behind me, Mrs. Halloway was getting up. Her neck was twisted at a weird angle, but she was still smiling. "You can't break a bargain," she said. I hit the box again and again. The lid flew off. The toys scattered into the mud. "No," she shrieked. It was a terrible sound, piercing my ears. I grabbed the baseball. I didn't know what to do with it. I just knew it was important. I pulled a lighter out of my pocket. I didn't smoke, but I kept one for emergencies. This was definitely an emergency. I flicked the lighter. The flame was tiny in the wind. I held it to the old, dry leather of the baseball. The stitching caught fire. It flared up blue and green, not orange. Mrs. Halloway screamed again. She fell to her knees, clutching her chest. The fire spread to the other toys in the mud. The plastic soldier melted. The friendship bracelet turned to ash. As the objects burned, the woods around me started to shake. The trees groaned. I backed away from the fire. The heat was intense. Mrs. Halloway was dissolving. Her skin was flaking away like burnt paper, revealing nothing underneath but darkness. I turned and ran. I ran blindly through the woods, branches whipping my face. I didn't stop until I hit the chain-link fence. I scrambled through and collapsed on the playground asphalt. I lay there for a long time, staring at the sky. The rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking. I was alive. I sat up. My hands were burned and covered in soot. My jacket was torn. I stood up and walked to my car. I got in and drove. I didn't go back to my apartment. I drove to a motel on the highway. I paid cash for a room. I took a shower, scrubbing the mud and ash off my skin. The water turned black in the drain. I sat on the edge of the bed. I felt lighter. The heaviness in my chest was gone. The feeling of being watched was gone. I had won. I had broken the anchor. I turned on the TV to drown out the silence. The news was on. "Breaking news," the reporter said. "A fire has destroyed the public library downtown. Firefighters are on the scene." I watched the footage. The brick building was engulfed in flames. I turned off the TV. I lay down and closed my eyes. For the first time in weeks, I slept without dreaming. But when I woke up, the sun was shining. I felt good. I felt free. I walked into the bathroom to brush my teeth. I looked in the mirror. I froze. My reflection was normal. I looked tired but normal, but behind me in the reflection of the open bathroom door, there was a shadow on the floor. It wasn't my shadow. It was shaped like a small boy, and it was holding a baseball. The ball rolled across the floor in the reflection, but not in the real room. It stopped at my heels. I looked down at the real floor, nothing. I looked back at the mirror. The shadow boy looked up at me. He raised a finger to his lips. SHHH. I realized then that I hadn't broken the curse. I had just annoyed it. And now it wasn't just watching me from the outside. It was inside with me. I grabbed my keys. I had to keep moving. Reclaiming my life wasn't a one-time fight. It was a war. And I was just getting started.